It helps in security, like incident responses or release automation, CI/CD. For example, at StackStorm itself, we release StackStorm with StackStorm workflows. That's kind of funny. And thanks to Orchestra workflow engine. So there are a lot of possibilities with StackStorm automation. And Bitovi is StackStorm partner and also a maintainer. In other words, we have a lot of expertise in StackStorm. And we have also a lot of expertise in platform engineering. And a lot of interest and experiments, and also great stuff that we're doing with platform engineering. And we thought, let's get best from the both, and so we created GitHub Action to deploy StackStorm. So we believe it helps to simplify the operations for our users and clients, and we open sourced it. And we want to share it with the community today. And I'm going to give a quick demo how Bitovi DevOps is using a new platform engineering techniques to simplify StackStorm deployments with GitHub Actions.
Yeah, thanks, Eugene. If I could just chime in here for a second. Yeah, so when working with StackStorm, it can do quite a lot, like Eugene mentioned. It's got like a sweet spot in auto remediation, but it can do server management with Jira tasks and all kinds of different things. But it is typically challenging to deploy and manage, especially if you have a pretty high scale of activity. And so the GitHub action that we're going to show today shows how to deploy single ones, but the underlying approach for that, for the GitHub action deployment technique, will allow us to deploy StackStorm even at like higher scale with like high available virtual machines or container orchestration and things like that. We can really provide a lot of scalable StackStorm value with this approach.
Yeah, awesome. And this GitHub action is available on Github Marketplace. You can use it for free. It's open source. And I'm just going to give a quick demo how to use it. It deploys single VM StackStorm to AWS. And of course, you need AWS account for that. I have AWS account prepared for me with credentials, and let's just grab this quick example and try to use it. I have also empty repository prepared here, and so I'm going to create a GitHub action workflow and spin the StackStorm instance. Let's just name it like ST2. And I need to modify AWS credentials for me. And I have StackStorm username and password here prepared in advance. It's in GitHub Action Secrets, and you want to do the same for you, as well as storing AWS secrets. Here we also install a couple of StackStorm integration packs like AWS and GitHub. But outside of that, yeah, there's a lot of configuration. Let me change the instance type. I want it a little bit bigger than default. Default is T2 medium. I just want it large for the demo to make it run quicker a little bit. And
yeah, if I could also point out one thing to point out here, the secrets for the AWS access key, you can set those up as GitHub org level secrets, and if you do that, we have different AWS accounts, and they're accessible to the developer, to our developers to be able to deploy through those accounts inside of Bitovi, and so we can sort of point them in different directions depending on what internal project we're working on. We can like really nicely segment how deployments happen for all developers with a pretty hands-off approach for the most part. We just have to set up the access for them.
yep. So I just committed the workflow file. Looks like the workflow started. Let's see status from GitHub Actions here. And it takes a little bit for GitHub to show some output. Yeah. So what's going on here? We are creating some resources in AWS. There's a lot of logic that's hidden under the hood in this GitHub action. That's the hard work that we did for you. And you can configure a lot via GitHub action inputs here. You can see different AWS settings, VPC, also domain name and certificates, and different Terraform configuration.
Yeah, and probably just to clarify, like the magic under the hood is really just infrastructure as code, and the GitHub Action inputs are really just surfacing infrastructure as code configuration up to the GitHub Action level. And so under the hood, at the surface level for developers, you don't have to really think too much about what's going on under the hood. But if you want to create new deployments or new deployment tools or GitHub Actions, digging one layer deeper, it's just infrastructure as code and a way to organize it, which Bill will talk about in a minute. But it's not necessarily magic. It's just nicely abstracted, I think, right?
Yeah. So there's complexity hidden behind the scenes, and that's what we aim for. Platform engineering help here with simplicity, I guess. So here the Terraform finished the resources I created, and it creates pretty much a lot for StackStorm. It's EC2 instance, different Route 53 records, essentially DNS, load balancers, security groups, essentially firewall, VPC stuff. So yeah, that's all happening under the hood. And what's happening next here is Ansible run. We didn't reinvent the wheel. We just use the Ansible official StackStorm Ansible roles here, so you can integrate your existing workflows with this GitHub action, and we allow overriding all the Ansible configuration vars file here. You can configure it and including the repository and modify it, and also maybe do some advanced stuff with pull requests and feature branches and how your typical workflow and review and approval works. And
hey, Eugene, quick question. Is this repo in a state where we could make the repo public?
Yeah, yes. Let me do this.
I'm doing it right now.
Yeah, please.
So yeah, I'll take care of it. I just wanted to check. Thanks.
Yeah, there are no secrets. I mean, all the secrets are hidden in GitHub action, so it's all good.
Yeah, it should be public now. So if you want to try again to take a look at what's going on in here, I believe is there a branch, or no, it's in main. All right, so the GitHub is committed to main. You can check it out.
Yeah, if you can share the link to GitHub repository, or let me do it in the chat, that would be also great.
Yeah, I got it.
Thanks. And so this configuration takes about 10 minutes usually. And I mean, StackStorm is really complex. It's maybe best compared to Kubernetes. Well, there are like more than 10 microservices. There is also backends like RabbitMQ, MongoDB, Redis. And here in just a couple of parameters in GitHub Actions, we can create a new StackStorm cluster in minutes. And as a developer, you don't always want to dig into all the details, all the possible details. You want to declaratively say, give me a StackStorm cluster, and maybe with a couple of customizations. And that's what we love about this approach, making something complicated easier. And that's how you can work with your developers as DevOps, as a platform engineer. And they'll probably like it.
Well, this
once you start automating stuff, it's hard to go back. Sorry, Phil, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, this is a good transition into speaking about why somebody might want to be able to rapidly develop and deploy something like a StackStorm 2 instance. And so I just wanted to touch on that really quickly. As a developer, one of the reasons why that we created this, from the developer's perspective, if you're doing something like StackStorm pack development and you want to be able to rapidly iterate on what you're working on, the last thing that you want is to be held up by services like StackStorm that are in UAT, that are in production, and that are gated. And so what this does is it allows developers to create and spin up this small scale StackStorm instance that they're able to test and vet some work that they're maybe doing, and then spin it down. And that'll happen in a matter of 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. Yeah, thanks for yeah.
Yeah, and that goes for all sorts of deployment or all sorts of apps too. Like working on a JavaScript, Node.js application or something like that. You want to be able to, build your service, run tests against your service, maybe point other people at it to see. And ideally, you're not like held up by infrastructure when that happens.
And Tobias asked a question in the chat that, as far as I know, the goal is to deploy a single virtual machine on AWS with StackStorm installed and configured. What about deploying a running instance on Kubernetes instead of a virtual machine? Yeah,
so if I can take a stab at that first, I think that maybe leads to a good transition into what Phil can talk about. So the GitHub action that we have right now is it's sort of like two things. It's deploy StackStorm onto a VM, and it's to do it in AWS. Both of those, like each of those dimensions can be changed out. So like instead of AWS, it could be Google Cloud, Azure, VMware, that kind of stuff. And we can do that through BitOps plugins, which is sort of the technology we're using under the hood. What was I going to say? Yeah, so we can build, we can have a GitHub action that deploys StackStorm, and essentially you select whether you want it to be deployed onto a single VM or HAVM, like clusters of virtual machines for each of the subcomponents of StackStorm, or on Kubernetes using like the StackStorm HA Helm chart, which is available. And I think it's still beta right now, but it's getting a lot more traction, and we're seeing it sort of move up towards and into production. So there is a pathway to have StackStorm onto Kubernetes. And with our approach, we can define not only the deployment of StackStorm onto Kubernetes, but Kubernetes itself. So you can have sort of a single environment definition where you say, here's Kubernetes, it's got all my metrics and logging and ingress and certificate management, all that stuff in it. Also, I want StackStorm on it, and sort of do that as the definition of your environment through these GitHub actions. And the developer or you who want it, all you have to do is specify a flag. Like I want this on Kubernetes in Google Cloud, for example. Right. Today, we only have the single VM to EC2, but the pattern is there and can support this scale and growth through plugins and stuff.
Yeah, and there are like different actions that we already created and published on GitHub Marketplace. So yeah. So it's still running, but yeah, maybe a question to Mick. What are the helpful things StackStorm you think can do, or maybe what's your favorite feature of StackStorm?
Yeah, good question. So, well, questions. I see two there. So one is what I like best about StackStorm is like the orchestra. I don't know, the model or the schema or whatever for how it represents a directed acyclic graph. A lot of pipeline runners like GitHub Actions or GitLab Pipelines and things like that, you set up the condition for running a task based on the output of the previous task or some previous set of conditions, which is okay. It's just your conditional is on like the incoming, as opposed to the way StackStorm Orchestra does it is when you run a task, your conditional is on what task comes next. And it sort of shifts the logic a little bit. And to me, I find that more powerful in ways that I can't quite understand. I think, it's easier for me intuitively to work with for some reason to do it that way.
Yeah, awesome. And in the meantime,
pipeline nerd talk.
In the meantime, we have a VM created. That's awesome. And this looks really nice. I mean, there is a new role here. You can just click and the instance is ready. Let's log in. And it works. You can see the packs already installed that we configured in GitHub and AWS. And yeah, that's pretty much everything from the demo. And Bitovi, well, Bitovi DevOps team put some hard work to make it look that easy and that nice. And yeah, that's reality. And under the hood, there is a framework that Bitovi built on its own. And you can learn about this framework from our next speaker, Phil. Take it away.
Thank you.
Nope, wrong button maybe.
Isn't that always the case? But just in the meantime, I'm going to throw this BitOps link in the chat just in case. Oh, Phil,
yeah. Hey, how's it going? All right. So,
yeah, well, there's two. There's also, I'll put some more links related to BitOps stuff, which is what Phil's talking about. I've got some more things I can share in there too.
cool. So you guys should be able to see my screen. So I'm just going to take you under the hood really quick and talk about what actually powers all this GitHub action. So deploying StackStorm, as well as many of our other GitHub actions that we have released onto the marketplace, are all powered by something called BitOps, which at its heart is a tool orchestrator that is written in Python. It packages up IAC tools such as Ansible, Terraform, Helm, anything really that you can use, all the industry standard IAC tools, and it packages that up into a container that is able to be used by developers for rapid development. When invoked, BitOps goes through a deployment sequence, which is customizable by us developers. And this allows us to control which IAC tools are run against which folders within our application and our operation repo repositories. Okay, so you might be asking, what is an operations repo repository? Operation repo is a way of organizing folders into a scalable folder pattern that BitOps understands. It can be viewed as environment, then tool, and then IAC underneath all that. And for BitOps, it really couldn't care what your environment and what your tools are called. All that is controlled within the deployment sequence, so it's all customizable. So we can name it arbitrarily, like environment, such as dev or prod, or you could be a little bit more silly with it and name it John Wednesday Night 3 Beers In. Probably shouldn't deploy this. As long as it's a valid folder name, BitOps is going to accept it and it's going to act on it. And so going down one more level, BitOps, again, coming back into the focus. BitOps is a tool orchestrator, as I said, written in Python. It's got a few benefits that I like to speak about. One is the no local tool installation. As a developer, I absolutely hate muddying my computer's waters with tool installations that eventually are going to have to be either updated or removed. So containerizing it is a brilliant way of ensuring that my developer platform stays nice and clean and stable while I'm still able to work. You're able to customize deployment sequences, which, as I said earlier, is a way of controlling how BitOps engages its tools to act on your operations repo. And some extra features, we have what are called hooks, which allow for arbitrary bash execution before and after a tool is invoked. This is really helpful if you want to prep an environment or do some after deployment tests. And finally, all the magic of BitOps is really just the plugins, and plugins are a new feature. There are wrappers around common IAC tools, and it allows BitOps to leverage those IAC tools as CLI instances. Yeah, that's where all the functionality comes from. So if you want to check out more Bitovi GitHub actions that are all powered by BitOps, check out that QR code and it should drop you right into the marketplace. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I'm welcome any questions if you have any.
Yeah, BitOps, and if we're waiting on questions to come in, I'll just sort of give a little background. Like BitOps was originally built as pretty specific logic around like Terraform and Helm or Terraform and Ansible, and it was all sort of baked into one project. And then last year we spent a lot of time extracting all of the different external pieces and sort of modelizing those into these plugins that so now we've got an AWS plugin as a cloud provider. We have a Helm plugin, a Terraform plugin, Ansible plugin, that kind of stuff. And with our approach, we like if there's any CLI tool, we can turn it into a BitOps plugin and then like organize it inside of BitOps, especially with some newer features. If you're curious about like how we can really like have a lot of power in how we organize our infrastructure as code, we can talk more about BitOps if there's time. But the plugins has really allowed us to like getting that software with the integration of BitOps into various pipeline runners. And so we're focusing on GitHub Actions, which we're finding to be quite useful in like abstracting this power of BitOps. So like for us, BitOps is very clear. Like we have visibility into a lot of different products. And whenever it comes to organizing infrastructure as code, if you want a GitOps first approach, it's pretty good. And so we like it. But it's really hard to convey that value, I think. And so one of the neat things with GitHub Actions and sort of this pipeline runner abstraction is we can really bring that power to the developer and abstract all the complexity of infrastructure as code. So like, you know, this brings us into platform engineering a bit where, you know, developers ideally, you know, DevOps is sort of getting developers and operators closer together, where developers need to learn like some infrastructure as code stuff and YAML, and operators need like more programming practices and stuff like that. But it's a really hard road to travel, I think, to try to, you know, there are a lot of people who are best suited, would be happier and more efficient probably to like focus on their skill set. And this sort of broadens that ability and gives like, you know, broadens the ability for people who want to focus on development but still need to deploy things, you know, to have that opportunity. So how are we on time? Can I share my screen and go through just quick high level of platform engineering and then sort of tie that back into our GitHub Action approach and StackStorm Action we're talking about? Is there enough time, you think, to?
Absolutely. You guys have another 25 minutes.
All right, cool. Let's do it. All right, so let's see if you see a slideshow here. Cool, yeah, so this is, you know, the approach that we're using. GitHub is primarily used, or has traditionally been used for, you know, storing code, versioning code. You know, they're moving into artifacts. They're pretty heavy in CI. There are a lot of tools around like testing and artifact generation. And we're using it, we're finding a lot of value in using it with deployments as well. So we're looking at GitHub as a platform engineering platform where, you know, any company can like go ahead and start working with platform engineering today through this technique and provide, you know, really easy deployments for their developers. And you can work with us for anything that's more complex, and, you know, we're happy to dig in. So just a quick little journey here on the, you know, like a high level, you know, high level view of the DevOps maturity. So you start, you know, you have a project and you want it deployed. You have to go around, find different services that, you know, maybe are compatible. You know, you have to work within those kinds of constraints, or, you know, you go click around in a cloud provider and like spin up a machine and do some install stuff, and like you can get it to work. But, you know, if that's not your expertise, you want to focus on the, you know, your app and your service, not necessarily how to get it out there. So, you know, you have to sort of struggle along. You know, maybe your product gets big enough where you hire somebody to focus on DevOps, or hire a team maybe to focus on DevOps, so that whenever something new is built, you can sort of give it to them and they'll make sure it gets out there and is up and reliable and stuff. So this is like having a DevOps team. With platform engineering, the ideal state is that developers just have the tools available to deploy it themselves, and the platform engineering team, consisting of both operators and developers, are building this platform so that, you know, it's pretty easy, and a developer can have an environment. There's logging and metrics and, you know, alerts and, you know, accessibility and all that sort of stuff. That being the platform, and the team building that is, you know, the platform engineering team. So with mature DevOps, you know, like we at Bitovi have been doing DevOps for a little while, and we get a lot of requests like this. Like there are a lot of different things that we have to deploy. We have a lot of internal department stuff that we want to deploy to test things out, and to, you know, infrastructure to get things moving along. And all of that stuff takes time. And so what I'll say is, like, BitOps itself was pretty, like, it fits pretty well in the mature DevOps space. If you want to work strictly with BitOps outside of like GitHub Actions, or, you know, some pre-established pipeline runner technique with BitOps, you're in the infrastructure as code. You have people who have to know Terraform and Helm and, you know, deployment techniques and architecture. And with GitHub Actions, you can now move more quickly into the platform engineering space, where you can provide more quickly. All you need is, a secure account to a cloud provider, and you can provide access for all of your developers to be able to run their tests and do their experiments, to make their changes, to test their bugs and all that stuff. So we have a few of these today. One is a bit misleading. It's not actually BitOps. I need to take that off of there. We have a GitHub Actions deployed to GitHub Pages, which is for like front end stuff, using GitHub's newer approach, a GitHub Actions based approach to GitHub Pages. But then we also have deploy an app repo to EC2. So if you have any service at all that can run in Docker, you can use this action to deploy it to EC2 and work with it. And so we're doing this with quite a few things. We've got one that's Hey Emoji, which is a way to give other people on your team, like points and sort of like help boost team morale. And then there's another one, it's like a GPT chat bot that we connect to our Slack. So we have GPT chat in our bot, both of those being deployed by this same technique. And then we're also working on sort of a more generalized approach to consolidating common things across different types of actions that we're calling commons. The repos are open source, or you can hit us up if you have questions about that stuff. But yeah, so this is, with this approach, we can have something as complex as StackStorm to, deployed in something as simple as this. Even if we wanted high availability or Kubernetes or something like that, we could just add another flag in there and sort of abstract all of that, while still giving users the ability to customize the infrastructure as they need. So it's pretty powerful. We like it quite a lot. I think that's all that I had on this slide deck that I wanted to cover. Yeah, this just sort of like builds up, sort of what's under the hood. I'm happy to go through this a little bit more.
Or he pulls out another slide deck.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually curious, Phil, and I'd love to hear your take on just what do you think about the hype surrounding platform engineering right now? And kind of speaking to what really is the power of platform engineering and honing in on that as a development team.
Sure. So as an individual / small team to medium team, I find that there really isn't a heck of a lot of offerings for this idea of platform engineering, specifically platform engineering as a service. We have awesome tools. We have awesome hubs like Marketplace, GitHub Marketplace, like Docker Hub and all the such. But these are independent tools that are isolated. I wouldn't say siloed, but at least isolated. They're not really put together. And so what I find is really powerful with all this is that it offers the developer, I wouldn't say serverless, but very close to the idea of serverless, in that you can take I need infrastructure because I want to deploy my application to it and I want to test my application. I don't, as a developer, want to learn about infrastructure. I don't want to have to learn Terraform, right? I want to be able to just deploy my application. So giving developers the ability through a one-click shop to go, build me infrastructure, host it, give it to me so I can test it. Yeah. I think that's where the power comes in.
Yeah, and there's nothing in this that says we can't give them serverless. Like it could actually be serverless, whether it's the build pipelines or whether it's their application hosting or anything like that. We can have serverless plugins for BitOps relatively straightforward way, especially with the new upgrade to BitOps with the environment level BitOps deployment config stuff. Like that opens up some doors, I think. Which to a little bit of context there, you had to define at the BitOps. You had to if you had another tool or you wanted to have the tools like Terraform and Ansible executed in a different order, you had to build your own BitOps image. But with the recent update, you can use the base image that has the tools that you need, and then you can sort of organize them at your ops repo environment level, which is really, really cool. I think there's some interesting use cases that'll come out of that.
Yeah, agreed. And if I could just further that last thought a little bit more, just because I've had some time while you were speaking here. We've had clients that are like rather large, even right now, like concurrently right now. And I've been as an employee to large companies. Large companies love as an a la carte service, as a service, as an offering, as a platform engineering offering. They love to wrap existing tools, rebrand them, and then offer them, right? I saw this a lot in Canadian banks where the a la carte system was just Jenkins and it was wrapped around and renamed to whatever. But it's just, at the end of the day, it's just Jenkins, right? Like that's what it is. And so I find it interesting, specifically now that I've gotten to work on it, I find it really interesting that these large corporations do that, but really that hasn't really taken place in the smaller organization space to then help and assist with solo open source, any developer who doesn't have an enterprise behind them.
Yeah, and that's where this, you know, if there's a product that gets close, like say Jenkins, for example, in that analogy, there's inevitably going to be some business layer logic or need that needs to be abstracted. So then the platform becomes an amalgamation of, you know, those tools and business logic and stuff like that. And that layer, that extra layer actually makes a lot of sense. We see it in StackStorm quite a bit too, where StackStorm has a really good API. It doesn't necessarily have a good UI for non-technical users, or a way to like interact with it well with non-technical users, like folks who are not familiar with YAML, who don't know, you know, directed acyclic graph concepts, you know, and stuff. And so for them, and we did this with a client a while back, where we had a UI layer that was like a simplified version and scoped to their business needs version of StackStorm. They could create rules that connected triggers to actions. They could, to some degree, orchestrate workflows in sort of a minimal capacity, but we were able to abstract things that we wanted them to do and make it easier for them, and then just interact with StackStorm behind the scenes. And I think a lot of the platforms that are coming out of platform engineering, you know, a lot of companies have almost a need for their platform to be company specific and not open, because there's always like some, you know, some specific dimension that needs to be captured, you know, in the platform they offer to their folks. But I don't know, like, I mean, I think, you know, GitHub can get us quite far, you know, to being able to provide the features of platform engineering. You know, I'll call out too, we've been talking a little bit with a company called Foresight, and there's I think runforesight.com or .app or something like that, and it's basically a dashboard that shows metrics over time for your GitHub pipeline executions, right? And so like, that's pretty good for CI. Maybe it can be updated for CD, but then as a platform engineering concept, it's really easy to integrate with your pipelines. You authenticate it, you accept the that it needs to read your repos, you give it access to specific ones, and now it can give you really nice metrics of CI, and you know, could upgrade that to include deployment-based things too. So I don't know. I have a lot of faith in GitHub and where they're going, and I would wager that some of these concepts are going to be sort of bubbling out of GitHub core features eventually too.
Yeah, it's.
But in the meantime, you can deploy a lot of stuff. Sorry, go ahead.
It's cool, like, to use GitHub as a platform engineering tool. I mean, it's just a pipeline runner, but it could be a platform engineering tool, and that's pretty interesting. And looks like we also could use StackStorm as a platform engineering tool, as you mentioned,
Right.
like creating a custom UI, something that Bitovi did in the past, and just having bringing like several shortcuts that developers frequently use with StackStorm, and elevating them in terms of productivity or doing things faster. So I think, yeah, that's pretty powerful. And for me, like, platform engineering is definitely achieving more with less. You kind of invest in the beginning a little bit, like doing coding, the DevOps team codify something for developers, and do some smart decisions in advance based on their operational experiences and best practices. And that's the power of platform engineering for me. So that's how DevOps team could contribute to the overall team success and making developer life easier.
Mhm. Yeah, and I guess as a final bonus, just thinking off the top of my head as a final bit to the specifically our BitOps GitHub Actions, one of the benefits of that is that if you are a small team who are looking to begin maturing your DevOps experience, this sort of action is great because it, like I mentioned earlier, it focuses and uses this idea of the operations repo pattern, folder pattern. We're not going to get too much into it, but really what I want to, the takeaway there is that as a immature DevOps, let's call them team, you need to begin codifying, templatizing, and standardizing your tools, your IAC, your code, right? And operations repos will naturally allow you, well, it actually will force you really to follow a really strong folder pattern of organization for said IAC tools, for said, for the configurations and whatnot. And so you get that benefit of like, well, I'm onboarding, I'm becoming a mature DevOps, like I want to build our DevOps team for my group or whatever. How do we do this? Well, BitOps enabled GitHub Actions enable you to both start that development journey and start going down the serverless route, while also kind of showing you and enabling you to use this operations repo to organize. So just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, and
right, and we've also had.
Nope, go ahead, Nick.
Sorry. Right. So we've also had clients that, so like even if you're not using BitOps, which there are a lot of use cases where maybe it doesn't make sense. But even if you're not using BitOps, you need to have some level of versioned infrastructure as code. Maybe it's templatized so that a system like Harness or Spinnaker or something can sort of get in there and like swap out its understanding of the world and like merge them together or whatever. But you still need some way to organize that. And we found that even when companies outgrow BitOps itself, because BitOps doesn't provide a lot of the platform engineering tools on its own that you might want, the operations repo folder structure and organizing your infrastructure as code in that way is still quite valuable to sort of reason about what exists in the world from a checked in code perspective.
Yeah, just to further that again, so we've had, not getting into specifics, but we've had clients who have matured past the idea of BitOps, keeping the organization of the ops repo, and then moved on to larger tooling for this sort of area, such as Argo CD. And so the ability to migrate to a more mature platform with fairly minimal headache, I think also speaks to itself. It allows you as a development team, again, this is the forward-looking of the DevOps experience. It's, well, we're going to templatize and put it in today, but how is it going to act tomorrow? And we found a lot of success in that. Today is pretty good for our developers, but even as you bridge into tomorrow and you start moving towards that mature DevOps, we can still support you, and a lot of the patterns that are shown here are relevant.
Yeah, and if I could come back, and then Heather, I'll stop. I mean, I can maybe. What's your topic about? I have one more thing I want to touch on.
No, I want you to touch on what you need to. We've got plenty of time, and I was just gonna kind of
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So Phil mentioned about if you're a smaller team, these GitHub Actions will help sort of get to production sooner. You can get your apps and like your infrastructure and stuff out sooner. And I would say the StackStorm GitHub Action specifically, it's we've removed a pretty big barrier to tinkering with StackStorm and getting in there and using it. So most of the engagements that we see with StackStorm are folks who are investigating some way to automate some set of components in their infrastructure, and you start out pretty small. You have a single VM. Most people do the one-line install sort of thing. But this gets you closer to a scalable approach much more quickly, because now not only do you have a machine you can work with and branches and things like that, but you also have it checked into code like out of the gate. So you can really sort of kickstart your ability to get in there and start working with StackStorm instead of trying to figure out how to deploy it. So if you want to take a look at StackStorm and you're starting to work with it, and if you have access to AWS or want to help with a cloud provider plugin or something, this action is a great place, I think, to take a look and kickstart what you're working on.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I wanted to touch on, just like of the roadmap for you guys and what you kind of see is coming down the pipe for you all at Bitovi and the DevOps team. I know that we support the AWS, but I just wanted to see like what the expansion plan, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely talk about that. Maybe Phil, do you want to?
Yeah, I was going to wait and see who spoke up first. Yeah, so our action plan for BitOps currently is, of course, supporting more cloud providers in GCP, Google, and as well as starting. Well, I mean, Tobias already kind of posted it up on the Kubernetes ask, but I think honestly, if there is interest in a high availability StackStorm deployment into Kubernetes, I think, again, that's one of those things that we can begin focusing on. We already have tooling such as Helm that helps us with that, so it should be an easy step towards that.
Yeah, just a matter of finding the time to do it. But
yeah, that's what it is.
Like cloud provider support. Some of it's going to be driven by interest. So if you are interested in any particular area of growth for this, like if this is an interesting approach for you, you think it's going to be valuable, or it might be valuable, you want to check it out or something, like let us know. If you're using GitHub Actions and VMware, for example, we can take a look at creating a VMware plugin and getting hooked up with that. Be happy to work with you on prioritizing some things. So there's a lot to do. We can't do it all, and it's not, barring a few things that have happened recently with Commons, like it's not super critical which direction we go in. So if you have a preference, we'd be happy to go in your direction and sort of see where that takes us, for example. So
I love that. And I know that we just touched on quite a bit, and I know that all three of these guys could go into it in much more detail and would love to have conversations. So we just kind of want to take this opportunity to invite you to DevOps. Our DevOps team does a fantastic job being available to people, like should they need it. So if you have a question, you can always throw it in our Discord community. It's a fun community to be a part of regardless, but especially if you want to get a hold of Phil, Eugene, Mick directly, with a simple question. And then if you do need to take it further, of course, there's DevOps consulting, and you can always reach out to us and ask for that. Because these guys, they want to chat with you, they want to help you do all the complex DevOps things that you need. And then the other thing is that they do offer DevOps office hours. So every Wednesday from noon to 1 p.m., you can join them on a Google Meet. So it's very informal, and you're just welcome to be there and ask questions or just see what's going on. And I'm going to throw that Google Meet link in the chat, but you can also find that available on our Discord. It's always in the events section. Any closing thoughts, Eugene, Phil, or Mick?
We also have a platform engineering consulting page, bitovi.com/platform engineering consulting, snake case. I'm sure you put it in there, but it's sort of a high level representation of how we approach platform engineering. There's a focus on GitHub, but don't let that scare you away from if you're using GitLab or Jenkins or Bamboo, any type of pipeline runner, we can pretty readily work within. But the goal of from my perspective, the goal of platform engineering is to allow developers to basically have end-to-end visibility and control over their deployment environments with little need for hand-holding or oversight or digging into the details of infrastructure as code and stuff. So anyway, if you want to chat more, we're around, hit us up. I'm happy to hop on a call and discuss DevOps and platform engineering and things.